Hello everyone and welcome back to the next lesson of our Java course. In this lesson, I'm going to focus on to the Java variables. This is again another core concept of Java programming language, but I would say this is not only applicable to the Java language. The concept or the things might change based upon the different languages, but it's a core or a fundamental concept for any programming languages, right? When it comes to the variables, all right? So just what Java variables are, right? I'm going to cover a few things into this one, like what are the variables, what Java variables are, right? What is the use of them? How I can declare, how can create the Java variables? What are the different things on the Java variables, and few other things. Sometimes what happen is we normally club together Java variables and data type, but just to make things more clear, simple, I'm gonna separate out both the topics. I'm gonna cover Java variables in this one and the data types in the other one. One of the reason is if I combine both of them, the video will be a little longer. So I just want to make sure that we are focused onto the Java variables. All right. So what Java variables are, right? So think of Java variables some sort of a containers that stores the data. All right. Imagine like you're packing a things. It's in right. So in a programming world, a variable is that box where you can store the different type of information. For example, it could be a number, it could be a string, it could be a boolean value, or it could be something else, right? Or another example is probably the different containers in your kitchen, right? So they holds a different kind of a things within the kitchen, right? So variables are on a high level are same sort of a things. Okay, so think of this one, right? For example, this is one of my container which basically holds a number. All right, so this is in terms of a Java, it's a int. Don't worry about what int is, I'm gonna cover in the next lesson. I have another box which containing a decimal number, or which contains a floating value, right? So this is basically a double value. I have another one which contains a string. This is another kind of a container for me, right? So these are all sort of a variables into the Java. All right, variables. I want to touch base on a very critical point onto the Java. So Java is known as a strongly typed language or a strongly typed system. What do you mean by a strongly typed system, right? So it's kind of basically I would say, okay, think of it like you are labeling other things. Once you declare those things, you can only basically handle, stores, or manipulate the data around those things only. Here, or once you label that variable saying, okay, my variable is only gonna hold the int value or the numbers, then you cannot add a string or a double value into it. That's why it's called the strongly typed system. All right, if you, let's say, if you declared your variable saying, okay, this variable is going to hold the string values, then you cannot put basically a numeric value into it, and there are a lot of benefits out of it. There are other languages, probably they are not as strongly typecast or type system as the Java, but Java is really a strong type system, right? And there are benefits because the compiler can do the checks, which we talked about earlier, right? That means you don't have to basically wait to run the program. If you are making these sort of mistakes, compiler is gonna tell you upfront even before your code is ready to run. All right, okay, so now since we have the basic understanding about what Java variables are, let's say you are creating a program where you want to store the customer information or a customer age, right? Then you definitely need some sort of a container to hold that information, right? That is nothing but a variable in your program. You're gonna create a variable. Let's say the name of the variable is age, and then you're gonna store that information into that variable. All right. So let's now get into some of the details about these variables. There are certain rules, there are certain things around these variables which is really needed for us to understand those one. So now, since we get the understanding of the Java variables, I think it's a good time for us to get into more of the coding part of it. There are multiple things around the Java variable. For example, there are certain rules, there are certain things which we should be aware in order to utilize these variables in a more efficient and in a more better way. All right, so I have written this, created a class Java variables. Okay, now the first thing is we have to declare our variables. All right, so let's think about this example where I want to store the customer age information. Okay, so so in short, this is how you're gonna write a variable. All right, this is a variable. So there are few parts of the variables. Let's talk about this one. So first one, int. This tells the Java compiler this is the data type. In short, this tells me what kind of information this variable is gonna hold. So once you define the types, you basically telling the compiler that, hey, if I try to store something else other than int or a whole number, just flag that. All right, and we'll see that one. This is your variable name. This is just a, there are few rules around the variable names, but other than that, it's just a label. Think of it as a label, like for example, a label that probably you are putting in your kitchen containers, right? So again, in kitchen container, you want to name your variable, which is easy to understand, right? So similarly, there are a few rules which we're gonna talk about it. All right, and then so this is what we call it as a declaration. Okay, declaration of my variables. All right, and then I can probably set, say, age is equal to, let's say, 30. All right, every variable, and as you know, right, in Java, one of the thing is every line or statement is going to end with the semicolons, right? So this is basically nothing but a initialization of your variables. So again, as I said, this defines the data type. This is a variable name, and this is the value that has been assigned to the variable. And there are a few things. There are kind of two ways I can create those variables. I can combine these one, and I can say combine everything into one. So this means this is the data type, this is the variable name, this is the assignment operator, and this is the value. So I'm saying create a variable age, label that variable, or tell the compiler that this variable can only hold the integer values, and then assign the value 30 to this variable. All right, this is one way of doing it. In some cases, let's say I'm gonna define this variable, right? You can also create this sort of a variable, which means I don't know the value yet, so I will create a placeholder. I will not initialize this variable, but I will declare a variable, and then whenever I have the value, I will use this variable to hold those values. Okay, all right, so now since I have declared this variable as of the type int, let's see if I'm gonna assign value is 30.5. Can I do that? No, right? Now the compiler is giving me the error saying you have told me that the required type is int, because in the first line on line number 7 I told that my variable can only hold integer values, and now I'm providing it a double, which means I don't have to wait until the program runs. My compiler was able to identify the problem and able to tell me that hey, there is a problem. So this is one of the benefit of a strongly typed system, because number one, it basically prevents the mistakes. It catches the error before even the program runs, right? There is a clear communication. So everyone knows, even for in your, let's say right now you are writing this program, tomorrow someone else might be working on this program, right? So there is a clear communication. If I read your program, I can immediately get to know that, hey, in the age I can only store the integer values, I cannot store anything else, right? And then the safety is always there, because now I'm stopping the unexpected behavior in my code. I'm already defining everything upfront. So make sure when you're defining your variables, we have to be clear what kind of things I'm gonna store in my variables, right? So this is one example. Then I could be another example. For example, I can say double decimal number. Let's say I'm gonna set the value as 3.14. Okay. Similarly, if I have to store text, I can say text is equal to hello world, right? Okay. Similarly, I can have a boolean. Bool is equal to true. Okay. So in this one, for every variables, I am telling upfront that what are my intention, what kind of values I want to hold in my variables. All right. Again, as I said, when you start writing the programs, you will see that for every sort of even for a smaller program, you're gonna use a different number of variables based upon your requirements. So there will be hardly anything where you probably are not gonna create the variables, not gonna use them to store your values. All right, so I briefly talked about this one, right? So again, variables again are the labels, right? But there are certain rules which we have to follow, and there are certain conventions or recommendations which we should follow, right? Number one, our variable name should be meaningful, right? For example, I'm right now I have named this variable as age because my intentions are to store the age for my customer, right? I could also use saying int x is equal to 30. From the compiler side, there is no problem. I can use this variable x to store the variable customer value, right? But think of maybe when you have a lot of programs or a lot of code in your file, can you just go to a specific line and find out what x means? You probably have to go to different places and try to understand, right? Okay, what x means. But if you name it meaningfully, you don't have to spend a lot of time with looking at the name. You understand that, hey, okay, this is being used for the storing the age. So number one is, and this is not a rule, this is a recommendations, as you have seen. The other rule is your variable name should start with a letter. You cannot start your variable names with a numbers. If you try to start your variable names with a number, your compiler is gonna stop you right there, saying, hey, you cannot, by the rules, you cannot use variables starting with the number. Let's try to do that. Okay, int to age, can I do that? No, I cannot do that. There are a few other conventions. If you have a longer variable name, use a camel case. What do you mean by camel case, right? For example, in my, and this rule is not applicable to the variables, it's applicable across all the Java ecosystem, right? So what I mean is, for example, decimal number, I could write it like decimal number. That should also work. From compiler perspective, there is no problem. But as a language convention, you have to use the camel case. That means now numbers start with n, and then let's say I have to say double what is my age. So you see, I'm using a certain conventions here, right? Which says I is capital, M is capital, A is also capital, right? So that's the other thing. There is another rule which says you cannot have a space between your variables. So you cannot have something like this. It's not gonna work. You have to make sure there is no space in your variables. All right. So that's again a rule from the Java. All right. And the third thing which you have to understand is Java, these variable names are case sensitive. So something like this one, right? Decimal number. And if I declare another variable which says decimal number, from Java perspective, these are two different things. So be careful when you are naming your variables. Make sure you are well aware of the case sensitivity and the other things around it. All right. All right, so now we have learned some of the basic around the Java variable. Let's do some sort of a simple calculations around these variables, right? For example, uh, what happens, right? For example, if I say system.out.println age, if I run this program, okay, you see I'm getting the value as 30, but I can also change the value of my variables. What I can do is, if I say here age and I want to change these values, you can say 32. Now if I run my program again, it says 32. So one thing which you have to be aware of, when you want to change the value of variables, you don't have to basically use the type. So the declaration is only once in your program. You declare your variable and then you start using this variable. Now I'm just using this variable, right? I am not defining the type. The reason is because now, since I have defined the variable on line 7, my compiler understand that this is just a int type, and then I don't have to basically keep on telling the compiler. So compiler is going to keep track of those. Okay, so there are few common mistakes when we talks about the Java variables. All right. So number one is sometimes you forget to initialize that variable. What it means is, you basically declare a variable and then without the initialization or without assigning the value to the variable, you try to use it. The system is gonna throw the some errors, and we'll see about that one. And then again, using some wrong variable types. For example, when I'm saying wrong variable types, I mean, so you want to hold the integer values, but you have declared your variable as a string. So that's not going to work because it's not going to give you the intended values. Normally you declare integers because you want to run some calculations on it, but string is not meant for a calculation. Similarly, you want to store some decimal numbers because that's your requirement is, but you have declared your variable as an int. That is not going to work for us, right? So you have to be clear once you thinking about the variables, what kind of a data I'm going to supposed to hold in this variable, and then based upon those requirement, you should define your variable type. Okay, and the last one is as we talked about it, right? Incorrect naming. So there are two things out of it. Number one is you are incorrect, your naming is wrong, and second thing is more of a convention where we have to make sure our variable names are very much clear or they have a meaningful names around it. All right, so I hope that gives you a understanding of the Java variables. This is again the building block when we gonna talk about the data types in Java in our next lesson. Thank you for watching this video, and if you have not subscribed to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe and share to my channel. Thanks once again for watching this video.